Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel WSO2 Bytes. In continuation of the conceptual knowledge in my previous video about API gateway flow, this video will provide the conceptual knowledge about an important feature of WSO2 API Manager, that is rate limiting. So let's start. Here is the quick agenda for the session. What is rate limiting? Why rate limiting is required? There are different levels of rate limiting in WSO2 API Manager and a rate limiting flow at different levels in a typical scenario. So what is rate limiting? Rate limiting is basically used to control the number of API calls made by the API caller or the API subscriber, or sometimes we say API consumer, in a specific duration. So let's see a simple analogy. As you can see, there are different clients and applications that consumes a particular API via API gateway. All have different requirements and usage policy. A web application that requires X requests per second, a mobile app requires Y requests per second, or maybe something else. A batch job may call the API in a non-business hour with X requests per second, and an integration system that requires calling the same API with N requests per second. So here we must provide the governance of API consumption for respective application by applying the rate limiting policy on the API gateway for respective applications in order to have a fair usage of the API as per the backend capacity and optimal utilization and keeping the system healthy. Why rate limiting? So this is something that, let's say you have a system that is exposed to the external world and it must be secured for a legitimate access by the valid consumers. There are different reasons we must apply the rate limiting on APIs. For example, preventing the abuse and overuse, which protects the resources and mitigate for the DDoS attacks. Ensure fair usage, that is equitable resource distribution among its API consumers, and the quality of service to be maintained. Enhancing performance and stability, which optimizes the server load and prevents the server overload. Improve user experience. So it gives a consistent performance of the API consumption by particular API for the particular user and predictable behavior to be consistent. Cost management. Of course, our backend has a certain capacity and we must apply the governance if we have done the monetization. So we must control which subscriber has which quota they can consume. So it controls the operational cost and the resource allocation. Rate limiting levels in WSO2 API Manager. So rate limiting, there are different levels of rate limiting. We'll see one by one in WSO2 API Manager. The first one is subscription level rate limiting that we can configure through the API Publisher portal. Sometimes, typically, it is called as a business plan. So, which is a bronze, gold, silver, or unlimited. And we can also apply a burst control, which is a combination of the criteria. For example, 100 requests per day and 10 requests per second. So overall, the daily quota would be 1000 requests per day, but not more than 10 requests per second would be allowed. So this is a sample screen of a publisher portal, which you can see. Through this screen, we can configure the subscription level rate limiting for API publisher portal. Next, we have a subscription level rate limiting via the developer portal for API subscribers. So once subscriber logins to the developer portal, while subscribing the application to the particular API, they must provide the subscription tier. So based upon that particular subscription, API consumer would be allowed to consume the API. Next, the advanced rate limiting policy. So advanced rate limiting policy we can configure via the publisher portal itself. So API level policy that can be engaged via the resources section of the API in the publisher portal by selecting the API under the rate limiting level. Second, an API is made up of more and more resources. So we can have one resource, we can have two resources, or we can have n resource, and each resource handles a particular type of a request and is similar to a method function in a for larger API. So we can apply resource level throttling as well. And finally, the advanced level throttling, which can be created and configured via the admin portal, but it's visible in the publisher portal for configuring on particular API. So next we have application level rate limiting, which is applicable for the application developer. So once an application developer is going to create an application to the developer portal, they must select the per token quota. Okay, so the per token quota defines what is the rate limiting as required by the particular application. So as you can see, this particular red area which says that the per token quota is 20 requests per minute. So there are different levels of the default application rate limiting, but we can also create a new rate limiting for application layer through the admin portal. Yeah, so that is application level rate limiting. Next, the custom throttling. So the custom throttling allows system administrator to define the dynamic rules for a specific use case, which are applied globally across all the tenants. When the custom throttling policy is created, it is possible to define any policy you like. The traffic manager acts as a global throttling engine, and it is based on the same technology as WSO2 complex event processor, which is CEP, and it's used as the Siddhi query language. So you log into the admin portal, go to the custom policies, and you just click on the create new policy, and here you define the custom policy using the Siddhi query language. And once you define here, you can apply accordingly. Next, the blocking conditions. So WSO2 API Manager provides several mechanisms to block or restrict API access based upon the specific conditions. These blocking conditions can be used to control the access to the APIs, protect resources, and enforce the security policies. Here are the main blocking conditions available in WSO2 API Manager. IP address blocking. We can restrict an API call based upon a specific IP, so we can block a particular IP. Application blocking. So let's say there is one application which is subscribed to a number of APIs, and we would like to block that particular application consumer through based upon the application. So we can block that particular application using application key or the name. User blocking. So if we have a password grant kind of a implementation or a particular role which is given, so we can also block user or a role based blocking through the admin portal. We can create a policy from there, and we can that can be applied accordingly. API blocking, we can block a particular API based upon the for example, let's say there is a API version 100, so we can block that particular API access. API resource level blocking, it is also possible to have multiple resources of a particular API, but we would like to block only a particular resource, so we can block the access. For example, block access to slash get master path within an API. So this is also possible. We can apply. So now the rate limiting flow, this is the most important feature or most important concept to understand how this different levels of rate limiting is getting applied when an API called. So what happens when an API is called by the client, and how does rate limiting is getting applied? So here is the typical flow, which you can see the client makes a API request that goes to the API gateway. First of all, it checks for the blocking conditions. For example, it's a blacklist IP, user, API context, or the application. Then it goes to check API level policy, and then it goes to check for the resource level throttling or the resource level policy which is applied. For example, there is an API which has a context of a menu, so it could check there is a throttling policy on the resource level. Then it checked for a subscription level throttling, which is a silver, gold, and bronze we have seen. Then it goes for the application level throttling. So per token quota, as we have seen, so it could be 10 per minute, 5 per minute, or 50 per minute. Accordingly, it would be applied. And then it check for the custom throttling policy if we have created anyone. And finally, the hard level throttling, if there is any specific condition that we have applied a hard level throttling, that will be applied at last. And then it publish the throttle events to the traffic manager. So this is an end-to-end flow of rate limiting policies which are getting triggered in a series of events in a chronological manner. So that's all for this session. So thank you very much for joining this particular tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.